Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to see you all here today. So, I hope you all are having good holidays and looking forward to the new year. We've been discussing the Platform Sutra, but before I carry on with that, I'd like to say a couple words the um, about the nature of Dharma talks. What are we doing here? What am I doing? What are you doing listening to this? There's a story, a Zen story about the man who loved dragons, was fascinated with dragons, and collected uh, little statues of dragons, put larger statues of dragons out in his yard, and had paintings and watercolors, drawings of dragons all over his house. Had little paper dragons hanging down from his ceiling. Really fascinated with dragons. Maybe you know people who collect things of a certain sort. And anyway, he was that way about dragons. Well, as it turned out, the king of the dragons heard about this and was very interested in visiting the man. So he he came out of the water and located the man's house in this little town and went up to the door and knocked. Well, when the man opened the door and saw the dragon, he screamed and went running out the back door and was never heard of again. So when he encountered the real dragon, he was totally overwhelmed. There's a famous painting from that was first exhibited in 1929 by Rene Magritte. This is not a pipe, and clearly the message is that a painting of a pipe is not a pipe. You can't smoke the painting of the pipe. You can't put it into the pipe holder. You can't stuff it with tobacco. But the painting of the pipe might help you recognize a real pipe when you experience it. So that's what Dharma talks are. They're not the Dharma, but maybe at least some of the words can help you at times recognize the Dharma when you experience it. And you experience it in meditation and daily life. That is when the real Dharma appears. I bring this up because it, in a way, kind of relates to today's reading, which I'll read right now. Good friends, Hui Neng says, good friends, in this school of the Dharma, when we practice Zen, we don't contemplate the mind. We don't contemplate purity. We don't talk about being dispassionate. If someone says to contemplate the mind is basically a delusion. And because a delusion is the same as an illusion, there's nothing to contemplate. If someone says to contemplate purity, your nature is already pure. It's because of deluded thoughts that reality is obscured. But once you are freed of deluded thoughts, your original nature is pure. If you don't see that your nature is already pure and you rouse your mind to contemplate purity, you create a delusion of purity instead. A delusion has no actual location, which is how we know that that what we contemplate is a delusion. And purity has no form. If someone establishes a form for purity and thinks they have achieved something, those who hold such a view separate themselves from their own nature and become trapped by purity instead. And if someone cultivates dispassion, as long as they don't pay attention to the faults of others, their nature is dispassionate. But deluded people act dispassionate and then open their mouths and talk about right and wrong and turn their backs on the way. Meanwhile, contemplating the mind and contemplating purity are actually what separates them from the way. Well, these distinctions may seem subtle, but they're profound and they go to the heart of what Zen is all about. Zen, of course, derives from the Chinese word John or the Sanskrit word jhana, and it comes from the root meaning to see directly. To Zen is seeing directly into mind. And as is often phrased, seeing our true nature, seeing things as they are. So when Hui Neng is talking about contemplating or looking at mind, looking at purity, he's telling us that when we make up a concept, a notion of mind, and look at it, we're separating from mind. There's already us and mind. There's already me and mind. And when we make up a notion of purity and give it various attributes, we're separating ourselves from purity. The notions of purity are common. People have different notions about what it means to be pure. It kind of relates to our moral thinking. We think that we talk about, in the traditional Buddhist teachings, we talk about right speech and right action, right livelihood, what's right and what's not right. And can formulate in that way potentially a notion of what actions are pure, or right, and what are impure, corrupted, not right. And having such notions, we applying them in the world, applying them to others, for instance, it's easy to slip into a pattern of, well, what that person's doing is wrong, it's impure, it's corrupt. And the way the mind works, we oftentimes blur that into, well, this person is wrong, this person is impure, this person is corrupt. And it doesn't take long until that sort of thinking becomes violent, an attempt to rid the world of impurities, rid the world of wrong, to bring about justice. In Buddhist texts, there's very little talk of justice. There's much talk of dukkha, suffering, human suffering, something we can all identify with, something we all experience, something we can easily, at times, see other people experiencing. And in the Mahayana tradition, there's much emphasis on the relief of suffering as a kind of mission for bodhisattvas. To liberate all beings, to free them from their suffering, from their dukkha. The emphasis on relief of suffering, freeing people from their suffering, is somewhat different from an emphasis on cleansing the world of injustice. Relieving people of suffering rarely seems to involve violence. Whereas, as we witness, cleansing the world of injustice seems to perpetually end in violence. So in Buddhism, there's not much discussion of just retribution, of revenge, of punishment, because there's a realization that with injustice, both the oppressor and the oppressed are experiencing dukkha in different ways. The oppressed may be experiencing poverty and pain, harm and loss. The oppressor, on the other hand, is oppressed by greed, anger, fear, delusion, which ultimately, as the Buddha taught, lead to suffering. They are the seeds from which suffering grows. And the final portion of this passage, where he talks about if someone cultivates dispassion. Now, dispassion can also be translated as non-attachment. And the Buddha did talk about attachment or clinging being something to be wary of, something that will lead to ill consequences, inevitably. So if someone cultivates dispassion, as long as they don't pay attention to the faults of others, their nature is dispassionate. Excuse me. What an odd thing to relate not paying attention to the faults of others as being non-attachment. You might think, well, is this a weird translation? Did Hui Neng mean something else? But actually, it's re-emphasized later in the Platform Sutra in the form of a verse. And in the verse, Hui Neng says, if you are a person who truly practices the way, do not look at the ignorance of the world. If you see the wrong of people in the world being wrong yourself, you will be corrupted. The wrong in others is not your own crime. Your own wrong is of itself your crime. Only remove the wrong in your own mind. And this is a theme that comes up repeatedly in Buddhism, and I think a theme well worth stressing. We have precepts. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't engage in sexual misconduct, don't intoxicate the mind. And these precepts are to help us if we aren't real clear, if we haven't achieved a level of clarity about what we should do and what we shouldn't do in various situations, because it just seems too complicated to us. They provide a guideline. Well, if it involves killing another being, be careful. You're probably treading on thin ice. You're likely to make a grave error. If it involves lying or stealing, be really careful. It's likely that won't be beneficial. So they're intended for us to apply to our behavior. They're not intended to be used as an anvil or a hammer to judge the world. They're not intended for us to go hither and yon, applying them to others and weeding out wrongness. So how do we respond when we perceive that there is an injustice? I think what the teachings are pointing us toward is to try to translate that in our mind. Translate it such that we pay attention to suffering and not right and wrong. can see the suffering in the oppressor as well as the oppressed, and do what is within our power to address the suffering that is present. If somebody is suffering from a delusion, do what is in our power to try and help them. We can't always do that because delusions really ultimately need to be resolved by the person, him or herself. But maybe by example, or by leading with a question, or by just being present calmly. We can help people be relieved of those things that bind them. But deluded people act dispassionate and then open their mouths and talk about right and wrong and turn their backs on the way. Meanwhile, contemplating the mind, contemplating purity, are actually separating us from the way. There's much more we could say about this, but I think I'm going to stop at that point. And just leave you with the question of how this all sits with you. Buddhism is a fairly radical practice. The Buddha was proposing a fairly radical change in how we approach the world, how we think about things, how we act in the world. So is this workable? Is it make sense? Is it something we can actually do? In today's environment, with what we're dealing with right now, in this complicated, crazy world we inhabit. Thank you very much for listening today, and we'll be going into breakout rooms, and I'll see you back in just a few minutes.
What about just one group today? It's not